focused on providing professional development for small college athletic administrators. And we do this through an annual workshop. We do consulting on campus and also host a weekly Twitter chat known as SCA Chat that occurs on Sunday evenings during the academic year. But mostly I'm an athletic director, and a key to my success over all of these years has just been the continued realization that I can be better. I've always looked for opportunities for professional development, whether it's through NACTA or a personal network. And part of what I would say on behalf of our panel today is that I think each and every one of us would say to you that if there's ever anything we can do for you, the best part of our profession is really this willingness to share ideas. So as recent events unfolded in very public and powerful ways, I was reminded again how discriminatory and unfair our world is. And to be honest, as I reflected on that, I was just really disappointed in myself, because truthfully, I had the naive idea that all is well and everybody feels loved and respected. So I did what I do. I reached out to people, including panelists that are joining us today, and said, help me. And as I did that, I really found that there were lots of other folks like me that wanted to have a conversation. So that's what we're going to do today. We're gonna listen, and we're going to talk, and we're going to share ideas, all in the hope that maybe we can make that one impact that makes one or all of our students feel more embraced and better, and like they have more opportunities. I do want to introduce Adam Gordon, who's the Executive Director of Rising Coaches. They're partnering with us today. Rising Coaches is a professional development organization that helps build coaches and helps them as they continue in their career path. Our approach today is a panel conversation. You will note the chat icon at the bottom of the screen. We encourage you to submit questions or comments using the chat box. As we reach the end of our panel conversation, we'll address those questions and comments. But now I want to turn it over to our moderator today. His name is Stan Johnson, and Stan is the Executive Director of the Minority Opportunities Athletic Association, also known as MOAA, and he's the founder and president of Stan Johnson and Associates. Stan?
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I want to welcome all of you to this panel and this forum. It is important. It's an important discussion that we have today. You know, a lot of the disturbing scenes from this past few weeks have left many of us kind of frustrated, angry, hurt, and a whole lot of other words that I can use to describe what people are feeling right now. Numerous incidents over the years has left our colleagues of all races and ethnicities unsettled and really feeling kind of diminished about where we are in our society as it relates to sports, and it relates to the things that are going on definitely in our society. This current moment, I think, is more of a culmination of collective pain that many of us have experienced. A lot of us experience pain around this area. And so we want to have these conversations, but these conversations about race and injustice can be uncomfortable and difficult. But the impact to our student athletes, coaches, administrators, and their families, you know, it can be, you know, it's too great for us to be silent around it. So we need to take this time to really have a conversation about it. Many of you have asked me, and I know I've had a number of calls, as probably you have, how we have these conversations about racial inequities with our student athletes and staff. Today in this forum, we want to have a small panel discussion with what someone said, small college athletics. I don't think they're small college athletics directors. I think they're big college athletics directors, because I think all colleges are important. So, but they're important to us, and they will discuss with you and provide you with a few strategies regarding these challenges. And I encourage you to submit some questions so we can take some at the end. Now, I just want to take a minute to introduce the panel. There should have been a link to their bios, and I'm not going to go through that, but I want to introduce them. Dr. Kiki Baker-Barnes, Athletics Director at Dillard University. Jason Horn, Director of Athletics and Recreation at Xavier University of Louisiana. And Marcus Manning, Director of Athletics at Centenary College. I want to get this started, and I think I'll start with Kiki, but because that's out of respect. She's probably better than all the rest of us in this. Dr. Barnes, you know, a lot of people have had a lot of conversations around emotional intelligence, but we've not had a lot of conversations about cultural intelligence. So if you could, in your own words, what you think this is, and what are 2 or 3 things a coach or administrator could do to help foster cultural intelligence on the campus?
Thanks so much and welcome everybody. Thank you, Jim. Jim's good, my good friend, and I feel like a sponsor for me in this industry. When I first started as athletic director, he was one of the ones who reached out and was always available via phone call. Has been very supportive of me. So Jim, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share today. So when I think about cultural intelligence, I think it's really simple. It's just our ability to relate and work effectively with other people outside of cultures. I think the one thing we have to think about where we are right now in terms of all the kind of the racial unrest is what does our circle looks like? Who are we connected to? I was having a conversation actually just briefly with my track coach who is on today, Coach Dillard. I think he's on here, and we were just talking about how uncomfortable it is to try to address issues. But one of the things that I think is really important as we as administrators try to move forward is that we spend some time in reflection and self-awareness. One of the things that anytime we spend trying to talk to a student athlete or anybody else about what's going on, we have to understand our beliefs and really confront things with ourselves. I think once we have a better understanding of self-awareness, then it will put us in a place where we can start figuring out how we can lead and be open to hear different perspectives from that may be differing from ours. I think that's really key. I can have conversations with people that aren't like me, and I can empathize because there's a relationship that exists there. If everybody in your space looks like you, then where is the diversity of thought and difference? That it makes it very difficult when you're not having constant conversations with different people. So I think when we start thinking about preparing for our student athletes to come back, we really have to spend the personal time becoming educated, learning, understanding what is happening, and not just kind of what we're seeing. I mean, we're going to get the media bites, but really reading and trying to understand the opposite perspective. I think, again, understanding that then puts you in a place where now you can be open and receptive to hear some of the concerns without taking them personal. And thinking that, oh, it's not me, I'm not the person that's doing it. At that point, then you kind of hijack the whole point of me coming to you sharing my concern, because now it's about, well, I'm not the person that's trying to be offended. Well, that means you haven't dealt with some things that you need to specifically deal with. And that's why I guess my first point, and I'm just going to give one because we got 3 other panelists. So I feel like if we each give one, that'll be better. But one is right now, getting education as administrators and really understanding it, not just listening to what you're used to hearing and what's comfortable to you and what you're comfortable with hearing, but really taking an opportunity to learn a little bit more, dig a little bit deeper, and have a little bit more awareness and understanding of what's happening. I'll have there are some people who are doing this work that I'll be able to share some information and some links that'll be helpful where you can get some support. But that would be initially my first recommendation.
Marcus, you want to go up next.
And it's a tough job following Dr. Barnes, but I'll try to do it. She's big time in the industry. And Jim, thanks again for the invite. Jim is a big time athletic director, and I've known him since my old NAIA days. So appreciate the invite. The way I think about cultural intelligence is I try to break it up into 3 buckets. And number 1 for me is awareness, self-awareness, but also being aware of my surroundings and the people I interact with, the student athletes I interact with, our coaches, our staff, and my colleagues. So that's the number 1 bucket. The number 2 bucket is just the ability to relate with people from diverse backgrounds. Do I have the ability to relate to people from diverse backgrounds and do it at a very high level? Number 3 in that 3rd bucket for me is, do I have the ability to work and play with colleagues, teammates across the board? And finally, that common thread, do I have the ability and the capacity to suspend judgment? So as I'm thinking about these 3 buckets, do I have the ability and the capacity, and do my folks around me have that ability to suspend judgment as we engage, as we interact, as we communicate with each other? So when I think about cultural intelligence, that's what I think about.
Jason?
Thanks for having me, Jim. You know, for me, and I'm fortunate because I have a couple people on campus that are really good in this space. Glenn Caston, who's on here today, he's our inclusion and diversity officer. He also happens to be our cheerleading coach on campus. So I have a regular meeting with him. And then Dr. Ashley Baker is our chief inclusion and diversity officer on campus. And before that, her career has been, you know, in athletics. So we've had some great conversations. But one of the things that I got from conversations with them is really, you know, when you talk about cultural intelligence, it's really recognizing differences. It's about the things that you can't see, you know, the religion, the differences in language, the differences in gender, and really just kind of recognizing that those things exist in a space. You know, I've had, you know, with what's going on in America, I've had several athletic directors, white athletic directors, who've reached out to me and said, hey, I really just need some advice on how to deal with this. And I said, you know, if you're an open door person and you have roundtables with your student athletes and your coaches, you know, sometimes you gotta lighten let a little air out of the balloon, and you just gotta sit back and really just have solid conversations with the folks around you. You know, Xavier University of Louisiana is a historically Black university. We're not exclusively Black, but we're historically Black. We are the only Black and Catholic university in the country. So, you know, there's some religion elements that we have to deal with on the regular. And I think our students enjoy the conversations. Our student athletes are very welcoming of others. And, but they also, you know, one of the things you get at an HBCU is they also like to keep people in check. And we don't fear that. We tackle it head on. When someone feels uncomfortable, they have no problem going to someone, whether it's me as the athletic director, and sometimes it's not me. It's our associate athletic director, it's our head coaches, and we just really for the, you know, the folks in athletics, we really just encourage having conversations about the differences that you may face. It's as simple sometimes as the restaurant that you select. You know, it really is just kind of being mindful of everyone that's in your group. It doesn't mean that you have to cater to every single person and every single whim that someone comes to you with. But it does mean that, you know, you got to consider some things, you got to listen, and you got to make people feel welcome. And you know, so when I look at cultural intelligence, it's really kind of encompassing of those things, not just race. It's really things that you know, like I said before, the things that you can't see. And that was a line that Glenn used in a conversation with me, and it just kind of stuck with me.
Thank you. You know, I have this script that's written here, and then I'm supposed to ask these questions. But as I told them before we got on, that when things hit me, this old person that I am, that I'm going to go off script, and so I'm getting ready to go off script, y'all. I understand that.
We're only 12 minutes in.
Yeah, I know you're only 12 minutes in. Yeah, guess what? They're all on the board of MOAA, so they know how I am. So I never stay on script anyway. Marcus, you said something earlier. You said judgment, and a lot of times what's happening right now is people are judging people based on what they see, not based on who they know the individuals are. When you talked about suspending judgment, that's very difficult to do in some cases. Talk a little bit about how you go about doing that, because a lot of times I think what people need to understand is that it's this internal stuff that we have inside of us, and that can be difficult to be able to stop. So if you could talk about that a little bit.
You know, it's very natural to do, and I think there are times where we all fall into that at times. And what's been great the last few weeks in having conversations with our coaches and our student athletes is we've talked about judgment. And when we walk into a locker room, when we walk into a meeting space, when we walk into a dining room, what type of thoughts do we have before we even engage people, before we even have conversations with people, before we even line up and play with each other or work with each other. And that can be a very difficult thing to do. And so number one is just opening up dialogue. I've been very impressed with our student athletes here at Centenary College over the last couple of weeks, asking for educational experience, wanting to know from their teammates, from their coaches, what type of experiences they've had. And so I think when we have those type of open dialogue moments, we're able to learn, and it helps us moving forward, not to prejudge. But it's very difficult to do, Stan. But I think if we consistently have open dialogue and it's top of mind for us, we can move forward in that direction.
Kiki, Jason, either one of y'all want to add into that?
No, I don't have anything. The only thing that I think my soapbox, if that's what you want to call it, is what I feel like I'll be on somewhat is, like, I believe that we've got to have we've got to open up the door for us to have the conversations with our student athletes, but we've got to have coaches and administrators who are prepared to listen. So I have a quote here, and I was reading a book. Dr. Robin Martin was the first female African-American athletic director at Dillard University. She's now with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation doing work, but she wrote a book about her experiences in academia and about racism and issues that she experienced in terms of her career. And one of the things she talked about in leadership in her book, Navigating Courage, is she says that to be an effective leader, you have to be really good at asking the right questions, and you need to really focus on deep inquiry and having good questions. Those are really, really important to being able to get to those conversations. And so my thing is, if the staff, if the coaches and administrators aren't being challenged, like how does that work? Because normally in conversations with student athletes, it's the power structure telling them what it is. For instance, when we went through this whole thing with the kneeling, coaches telling kids they can't kneel. The whole point of protest is, like, you don't get to tell a person how to protest. So if administrators and coaches don't understand that, one, if you're thinking that you're going to tell the student athletes or tell me as maybe a minority on a majority staff how I'm going to feel and how I should respond, that's problematic from the beginning. So when we're talking about having this dialogue, we really, really have to be thinking about where our coaches are, how we understand the power dynamic, and how do we break down that power dynamic to actually really have real conversations. And I feel like that has to happen at the leadership level first, and then we'll be able to have a real dialogue. And it's not us telling how we want them to respond to and how we need for them to do things, because we're trying to control the process. So, I mean, that's kind of my space. The self-awareness of our judgment, as Marcus has shared, is really, really critical. I'm gonna give you one more example and then let somebody else talk about it. When I hired my men's basketball coach, I had a profile for that coach, and in that profile, in my brain, that was a young Black man. It was a young up and coming Black man. That's who I wanted when I wrote the profile. So I'm going through the process and I'm looking through, and I'm checking off who meets the criteria. I get down to my finalist. I've got a really old white guy and I've got a young Black male. Like that, but again, my point is there was a self-awareness that existed with me that recognized that I've got a bias going in. Like if you're not aware that you're thinking those things, like you're not ready to have a conversation or open to hear from a student athlete, because you can't even acknowledge the fact that, well, yeah, I may think a little bit differently about that and that. And again, because we're powerful, I mean, we're in the power structure, so we're in charge. Like we have the power to silence them, and we've done it. We've done it all across this country for years. We silence people because it's not the way we think it should be. So we really, personally, again, for me, have to deal with our own thoughts about power, how it happens, and whether we're going to really be open. And that has to start at the top. Because again, coaches are dictatorial. I was the coach, I was dictatorial. And then I learned that I was like, I'm gonna have to do this a little bit different because this is a different group of kids. But at the same time, why shouldn't they have a voice? Why shouldn't we hear and really hear? Not hear so we can figure out how to tell them what they're not gonna do, but really hear so we can be better, they can be better, and we can grow together.
Right. Along those same lines, I agree with Kiki on all points but one. When she did her profile for her coach, she really was just looking for somebody that could beat us. And so that was her number one thing.
And we did.
In her coach, and he's won a few games. But along those same lines, I agree. But hearing a voice and listening to what your student athletes and what your coaches have to say, it doesn't mean to compromise your thought process and what you're doing for the greater good. And sometimes some students today think, you have a voice and you've given your opinion, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to happen. And you have to explain that as part of the process, that it's like, well, it's not, you ask the question, what do you think? And a conversation happens, and then students may say, we want X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't make sense either short-term or long-term. You have to make those decisions, and that's why you're in the role that you are as the leader, and, like I use the expression, and I know my staff is sick of it. I said, this isn't socialism. It's let's have a discussion. When I first got to Xavier, one of the things that I said to everyone is I said, let's talk about who we are and where we want to be. And one of the things that came up was, we want to continue to diversify our student athletes. And we've done that. And we've got students from around the world. We're growing in who is part of our family. And one of the things that I learned back when I was in college, is that it's healthy to have some uncomfortable conversation, and you can't shy away from something just because it's uncomfortable. And and I've taken that through my life and my dealings in business and in personal, and I try to relay that to our student athletes. When we hire, we get the best person and the person that's going to fit kind of what we're looking for. In terms of can they handle the culture that we're trying to grow and be, and really talk to our student athletes, and will our student athletes appreciate this person? If you've ever met our sports information director, Ed Cassier, who's a white man, our student athletes love him. And, you know, he has, you know, does he say some things that are kind of wild sometimes? Yes. But he never says anything with malice. And our folks really, really appreciate him and appreciate his candor in who he is. So Stan, I don't know if that answered your question, but you really have to, as you look at your hiring practices and look around, you know, do you have diversity in your staff? When you walk into meetings, is there diversity there? And it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we are hiring people that can share their wealth on diversity and not afraid of what the result may be. You know, nobody's trying to create lemmings. No one's trying to have everybody think the same way and have the same beliefs. But I think there's, in our space, we have to be willing to listen, and we have to be willing to open doors for other people so that they may think twice about a decision that they're making, or in their hiring practices, or their friendship, or the neighborhood they choose to live in as they move forward with life.
Thanks to all of you. You know, one of the things, you know, I travel around the country conducting diversity and inclusion education, and one of the things that often comes up in this process is that, you know, many of you have had diversity education on your campuses. We've had this, we lump everything into this category at one time. And that is Title IX, LGBTQ, all of the areas of physical disabilities, generational dynamics. There's so much going on at the same time. And really, we delve deeper into some of those discussions even when we have Title IX education, and we'll have LGBTQ education on our campus, and physical disabilities, and how to prevent sexual harassment, and all of those. We don't have this conversation about race. We have the conversations about everything else, but race doesn't come up. Why is it so difficult to have this conversation about race? Why do you think that is?
Because we don't have relationships. I always talk about this, like, I can say as a Black person, I've never felt comfortable sharing if I felt uncomfortable about something race, because I'll get fired. Like, everybody's talking about it because we're not going to get fired now. Now we can actually say how we really feel. But there was not a space that was available where you could say, well, no, there was a space, but it wasn't a space that was supported. So there may be a diversity person, but if the diversity person starts really trying to do the work of diversity and really trying to point out situations, then we want to make it go away. And so I just, it's a very emotional thing that we go through, because I can say this for sure, and for all my white friends, like, they're not, the white friends I do have are racist, but have they exhibited racist behaviors? Yes. But I wouldn't say that they were racist. But in the system that we live in, there are things that have happened. And there are behaviors that we have learned to survive. And as long as nobody talked about it, it was all good. So Black people, you can be uncomfortable. And if you are, don't come tell me about it. Just get over it. And so that's kind of where we've been, at least in my personal opinion. Now that kind of where we are right now, I think about things that happened. I remember one time when I was playing ball, like when we would play teams, I played on a team. I was at a school that was a predominantly white institution. So when we play HBCUs, coach would always call the kids thugs on those teams. Yeah, they were always the thugs. And I'm sitting up thinking, like, well, I guess I knew what he meant when he said that. I knew exactly what he meant when he said that. And I always thought that, like, why would he do that? Why are they thugs? He never said that about the teams that had all white players on them. Like, I never understood those things. So it's kind of, those are some of the things, but you couldn't say anything about that. I couldn't go and say that. I lose my scholarship, or I might get put off the team. Like, who knows? Couldn't say anything about that. We can't talk about those things. So I think it's so emotionally charged that nobody wants to be called racist. And nobody wants to be seen as the race baiter, so we don't talk about it. But we also know that in order to have healthy relationships, you have to be able to talk about tough situations. There's no marriage or no real relationship where it hasn't been tried. I remember about 4 or 5 years ago when I think it was the Philando Castile shooting, we had a really emotionally charged staff meeting. I mean, like an all-out war. Somewhat where we were, everybody's kind of arguing their point, like, and we have some members of our staff who had people who worked as police officers. So, they're like, well, I want my loved one to come home. I said, I want my loved one to come home too. We can agree on something. So the question is, how do we come together? But let me tell you this, we have great relationships. I know everybody on my staff personally. I love them. And because we have relationships and I know them outside of just, what they do in terms of their job, we were able to have a really, really tough conversation. And we talked for about a week, but we were able to come back together and say we both understood each other's point. But that's because the relationship was established, because we knew each other on a personal level. And I think that happened, that really works. So, I really think in our own little areas, with our own circles, that's where it starts. Like, I'm not trying to change the whole world. The people that I have relationships with are the ones that I'm working with. But being able to be truly honest and say how you feel without feeling like you're going to get fired. Like nobody thought that they were going to get fired for having that conversation or for saying how they really felt. No, nobody was in threat of losing their job, because the culture that I created in our department was one of where, if it's time where we have an open discussion, then it's open discussion and nothing's off base. Not being disrespectful, so we don't call names and things like that. But you can really get passionate about something and not fear that the athletic director is now going to come in and fire you because you got really passionate about something you believe in. And I wound up having, I wound up bringing in a piece of paper, and it had a 6 or maybe it was a 9, and I gave it to everybody. And you have 2 people standing on both sides of it. On this side, if I'm standing on the left, it looks like a 6. If I'm standing on the right, it looks like a 9. Well, from my perspective, that's what it is. And so when they were able to look at it, it was like, does it mean it's really wrong or right? Now, let me say racism ain't right, but there are other things, in terms of us differing on how we do things. Well, it's not necessarily that it's wrong, but it's just my perspective. And that really helped us to have honest conversations. But we have to be able to have those conversations without threat of losing their jobs. And that's for everybody involved. I need to be able to say what I'm trying to say and try to seek understanding. So if I don't understand and I say, well, I don't really understand this Black thing, I can't feel like I'm going to lose my job, lose my friends. Like, you got to hate me forever because now I'm vulnerable enough to say, I really don't understand, and help me. So I think we have to, again, it all kind of boils down to whether you have good relationships, whether you're open to being vulnerable and saying, hey, I really don't get it. This bothers me. Jim was vulnerable enough to say, hey, I'm struggling in this area. Can you help me? But again, a relationship existed. 15 years of a relationship between us and all of the people at least me and Marcus, I know for sure with Jim. So Jim could do that because Jim has a relationship. What do your relationships look like, and will you be vulnerable enough to hear it, to receive it, and suspend your judgment as you go through the process? Okay. That was long, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right, Kiki. Marcus, you got any things you want to add to that?
All great points by Kiki. I would just say 3 things. One is the history of race in our country makes it uncomfortable right off the bat, and it creates tension. And as Kiki said, it sparks emotions in us as we bring up race. Number 2, we have individuals, we have groups that have never had conversations about race. And when you've never done something, typically, if you've never entered into that space, you're gonna be uncomfortable because you've never had that type of dialogue. And we've had some coaches and student athletes that have grown up and they've never entered into that space of having conversations about race. Number three is not having this goes back to the first point I made, is just the awareness and really race not being top of mind for individuals. And so when you look at those three things, that can be uncomfortable, that can be overwhelming. And I think as leaders, just providing a space where we can have those uncomfortable conversations, I think is paramount, especially as we move forward. And as Kiki mentioned, she made a great point, is when you have relationships with individuals, that helps to peel the onion of race because there are a lot of layers to it.
Jason, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as you continue conversations, and for those of you that know me and what have you, you know, I don't mind having conversations about race, and they don't always have to be contentious. And you know, for those of you that have shared an iced tea with me at NACDA, I mean, if we talk about race, you know, it's in a setting that people just need to be comfortable. You know, it's not, you know, when you come from a space that you're not trying to offend anyone, you know, you're just asking a question. You know, when Jim called me and asked me, you know, to be a part of this, it wasn't, hey, you know, I need you to talk about your blackness on this deal. It's just, hey, how are some ways that you break down walls to have open discussions in my career? I work at an HBCU now. Most of my career has been not at HBCUs. And you know, one of the things, again, when I go back to a conversation I had with Coach Glenn, was, you know, typically, and we refer to Black universities as HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And other universities, we call them PWIs, predominantly white institutions. And as part of that conversation, we talked about that many of the conversations at PWIs revolve around tolerance, versus at HBCUs, it's about strength and support. How do we support each other? How do we continue to grow and be a part of society? Where at PWIs, many times, at least in the past, and I think it's going to shift a little bit moving forward, is that discussion is, you know, how's tolerance? Like I'll tell you this. I'll tell you that no Black person wants you to tolerate them. That this is just how they are, and that you just need to tolerate them because of the differences. Nobody wants that. It's that when I walk into a room, and I came up in this business through the marketing end, and when I got into marketing, there were very few people in sports marketing that looked like me. And now it's a little different thing when we go to convention, but it wasn't about tolerance. I want you to respect me as a professional. And if I do something that's way out there, call me out on it. I've had athletic directors call me out on some things. I've had some that say, hey, push the envelope a little bit. And that's really what we want. We don't want to be treated any different. We want that if we're up and we've done a great job and we're due for that promotion, give us the promotion. If we haven't done a great job, tell us. You know, everybody's not ultra sensitive. Don't believe that everyone is. You know, when someone gets bad news, people just react to bad news. That's just what it is. There's no difference. But you can't be uncomfortable with saying, well, you know, I've had someone say to me, I don't have that many minorities on staff because it's hard if I have to make a change. You know, it's not hard. If you're doing things on the up and up and you're not doing anybody wrong, then you have nothing to worry about. But to not give somebody an opportunity because of what may go wrong, that's not the way to do it. And we encourage people to be inclusive and to have, you know, open discussions. Again, like I said, in the HBCU world, like when we have our athletic directors conference call, you know, it's an open discussion, and we don't worry about stepping on anybody's toes. We have white coaches, we have we have coaches from all over the place, and I think everybody feels comfortable in this space, in their as we speak as a conference. We know that most of our student athletes are of color. We know that we have some that aren't. But the reality is in sport, you tend to go after who's going to put out the best product in competition. That's what you tend to go after. And I'll tell you, in the space of hiring, in the space of collaboration, you have to do the same thing. Don't worry about what's going to go wrong. Worry about what's going to go right. And I think I think you'll be well on the way to creating a better society.
You know, one of the things I want to switch gears a little bit here now, because we've talked a lot about staff and what we need to do individually. But there's an area now that I think is very important and dear to all of us, because without our student athletes, we don't need to be here. And I've heard a lot of student athletes say, I just want to be heard. I just, you know, I don't need for you to do something right now, but hear me. And I think a lot of this social injustice and what's going on is because people feel that they're not being heard. And that's what's happening. So let's talk about how do we create this safe space for student athletes to be able to have this open dialogue about race and other concerns that they have. What are some things that we need to do as individuals who are coaches and administrators to be able to have this space, to be able to hear them, but then be able to take it into action to help them be able to be successful?
So some of it, if I may, so some of it is, and we've started to do this a little bit here at Xavier, is you encourage conversations, and you start with your student athlete advisory committee, or we call it Association of Student Athletes, and you start there. And sometimes you have to have, you deputize them to have conversations, and you may not have an administrator in the room or on the Zoom as it may be. And you encourage them to have conversations, and then some of it, they will carry the water and bring back some of the discussion points. I think that's a good place to start, because, you know, some people, regardless of, you can say safe space till, you know, it's just like open door policy. It's an open door policy until it's not. And people always feel like there's going to be this aha moment that I caught you. But it's hey, I've had conversations with teams, and they'll have a call. I'll ask them, do they have any questions? And then I'll leave the room and then let them have a conversation. And you can't fear that. You can't worry about what's going to come back. You know, again, you just got to be comfortable in your own skin. And I think that that's a good thing, is to encourage conversations, but you don't necessarily have to be a part of the first conversation. It's that you've endorsed it. These are the folks that are going to lead the conversation, and it's peers. You know, when I meet with, but I got here at Xavier, I put a table in my office and I put some chairs there, because when I have conversations with coaches or with student athletes, I don't necessarily want to speak from a position of authority from behind the desk. And so I come out from behind my desk, and you kind of can get a little bit more candor in the conversation along those lines. So and sometimes you just got to look at some of those pieces. It's, you know, like I said, it's encourage conversations where there's not a director in the room or a coach in the room. And then, you know, you designate your captains or some leaders to kind of bring back any feedback that's there. You know, I think that's a good way to progress as you develop the feeling that we're all working in the same direction.
Marcus, how about you?
Jason made some great points, and I love the fact he mentioned, come from behind the desk, and that creates a comfort zone to have dialogue. Three things. One is provide an avenue or platform for a space to have these type conversations. Number two, temperature check. Allow your students to vent, and allow your coaches to vent and express their frustrations. We've been doing this the last few weeks, and I think it's been very helpful for student athletes to do it and to see their teammates do it. But then three, and Jason touched on this, is what are the action steps moving forward? And so the teams that I've had dialogue with, I've had conversations with 9 teams on campus so far over the last 2 weeks. I've asked them to identify 1 or 2 things moving forward. One team said it's as simple as just doing a group check-in every week. Another team stated it's let's have 30 minutes from here on out to have dialogue on race and what it means to us as a program and to us as individuals. And I think, one, providing a platform, but then following that up, making sure you have some action items moving forward, I think is key for our student athletes.
Along those same lines, before Kiki says anything, you have to. Most campuses now have inclusion and diversity professionals on the university level, and we're starting to see it more and more in the athletic space. And whether I've said it or not, I've learned a lot from our folks in that office. And fortunate, like I said earlier, fortunately for us, they come from the athletic space. And, so I plan on using the resources that they have. And, they go to a lot of seminars and a lot of things that folks on this call don't want to sit through, so if they can give you the highlights of the different things, for example, I asked Dr. Baker if she would talk about the new Title IX legislation in athletics, because it's her space, it's her wheelhouse, and she was excited to do it, and we look forward to inviting her. We're across, our campus is divided by a canal. We look forward to inviting her back across the canal and sharing her wisdom and the things that she's learned. Use your campus resources. Many times people think that athletics operates in a vacuum, where we're in a silo, and we try to break down those silos. But I would encourage people to use the folks on campus.
Kiki, you got anything, or you want to?
I mean, no, I agree with everything they said. Like, they both hit the nail on the head. And there are some additional resources. I want to throw out a couple of names of some people who are doing some of that work right now. Jen Fry is doing that work. Jen Fry Talks, I think .org or .com, I think. But Jen Fry is doing a lot of work with a lot of athletic programs. She was a former, I think, volleyball coach, but she's doing a lot of work in that space in terms of providing support, and can do workshop with coaches, student athletes, administrators. She's really good. And then I was asked to be a part of a group. The Ross Initiative was started by, I think, the Miami Dolphins owner. It's dealing with racial inequities in sport. And so they have some programming, risetowin.org. They have some online programming, and I think some of that may be free. That could be really, really helpful with really dealing with cultural competencies and trying to have that discussion around race. There's, they've got worksheets and all kinds of things, videos that can help lead some of that kind of work on your campuses. So I'd just encourage you to kind of visit those, jenfrytalks.com and risetowin.org. Those are the spaces. Of course, Stan does some of that, but any of these people could be very helpful in helping your campus or your teams do some of this work.
Great. I going to ask this question. This is an important question, I think, because I think a number of individuals on this panel, not just on the panel, but on the participation in the forum, want to know this. How do you create this safe space for white individuals to not be silent or scared of losing their friendships? I think you talked about that. Peers are being seen as not caring because they don't understand. What can we do to create this safe space for those individuals to be able to speak?
Speak to who, Stan?
Speak to anyone about this subject, about race, because a lot of people feel that white individuals feel they can't talk about it, or they're scared of talking about it. What can they do? What can we do?
I don't really know. I mean, I will say this, like, you may lose friends. I mean, if you are in a space where y'all don't agree, I mean, it depends on your friend circle. I know, I will say that myself as a leader, okay, and if you're on here, you're my friend, we can have that conversation. But what I'll say is, it really, you may lose friends, like again, depending on how they believe and whether or not they want to acknowledge some of this is real. But I think that it's incumbent of all of us to be able to have really good relationships where we can really get to the nitty gritty, whatever that means. As a leader, you know, my door is always open. I guess I have an open door policy. I have a diverse staff, so I've got white, black, I've had international people. I've always been open and slow to offense. We don't have to agree. I think as a leader, you have to be able to create that kind of space so that a person can share what they really feel and then try to work from there. But I think, you know, this is a time that takes courage. I mean, it takes courage to have to speak up. It's the thing that we teach our student athlete. It takes courage to do the right thing. You know the route, you know what you're supposed to be doing, but you're breaking curfew. It takes courage for that teammate to come to the coach and say everybody's not doing what they're supposed to do. So, I mean, I think at this time that there has to be, I mean, you're going to have to be courageous. And you have to just create a space where people can really communicate with you what's going on. But yeah, it's a tough time. I don't prescribe to have an answer to that. I know what I would create, but you know, again.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that people feel comfortable about being able to talk about this subject, because a lot of times people feel it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to talk about it. We talk about this. How do you have these difficult conversations around race?
Oh, okay. Well, then you need to be educated. You need to read. You need to learn as much as you can about opposing views. I think that's helpful. You can have a conversation when you have the education and the knowledge. Okay. You know, and I mean, not the bullet point, you know, not the latest media blitz on either side, but literally there are resources out there. Netflix right now has like tons of documentaries on race and kind of things that have happened historically. So I think, you know, in that kind of space, you just arm yourself with knowledge.
Right. Marcus or Jason, either one of you?
Yeah, two things. One is a tangible situation that happened last October, where we had two student athletes on Twitter sharing having some remarks toward each other. So we brought in the president of the Black Student Union, the vice president of a popular fraternity, president of SGA, and captain of one of our teams. We all had them come to my office and we had a 30-minute conversation. And toward the end, the vice president of the fraternity said this was my first conversation about race. And he was a white male. He is a white male from a small town. And he enjoyed having the conversation because it was civil discourse. There were some things and some points that were brought up that the students didn't agree on, but it wasn't highly charged in terms of emotional. It was, our students were peeling the onion. And so he felt, and he's since then engaged in more conversations about race, but that first exposure, he had a learning experience and it was a good experience for him. Another example is last Thursday, one of our student athletes, white student athletes, asked me to stay on for another 30 minutes to have a one-on-one conversation. Another one, it was another instance where he said, "This is my first conversation regarding race. Where I come from, we never talked about race. My family's never talked about race. So Marcus, I just want to let you know that A, I'm uncomfortable. B, I'm nervous about saying the wrong thing. But 3, I want to engage. So I may ask you in the future to continue to have one-on-one dialogue with me so we can have conversation." And I think as Kiki has mentioned, and as Jason has mentioned, the relationships that you can develop centered around these conversations, I think, is paramount, and it allows us as a group to move forward. But providing spaces like that, I think, helps.
No, for me, it's how to provide a safe space is I just check in with my folks from time to time. And like I said, it's not always about calling them to my office. I'll pop into, our athletic training room, and I'll just, I'll sit down with them and just ask them how things are going. And hopefully they have a comfort level to share anything that has happened, and that we can deal with it. It's not necessarily about putting anybody on blast, but I don't want to have a scenario where we have a staff person that feels uncomfortable in a space. And sometimes you have to check music, you have to check a lot of different things that students or younger people think is okay. For those of you that are in the marketing and event space, that someone just can't bring you a flash drive with a song on it. Because what is clean and what someone who's 19 thinks is clean are two different things. But with our staff, again, it's coming out from behind the desk. It's going and having the conversation, because as the leader of the athletic department, it's my responsibility to check on my folks. And it's not anything that's direct. I kind of do it indirectly, and sometimes folks share things with me when it does have to do with race, and some don't. Some people just kind of digest things differently. And but I try to have, when we do hiring here, we try to have diversity as much as we can, because again, I'm gonna date myself a little bit here. If you've ever watched the TV show St. Elsewhere, one thing that they always talked about was that it was a teaching hospital. And I look at this as a teaching athletic department. So let's make sure that we have people that can, all in all, it's a pretty safe space where people can interact with other folks that aren't like them, and they carry those for the rest of their lives. So again, hopefully some of you all got the St. Elsewhere reference.
Oh, I got it. Oh, but now I'm dating myself. Dang.
You are dating yourself. Let me ask this question, and then we'll open it up for a chat. I want to ask this last one, and then we can open it up for some questions in the chat that are in there. How do you hold our colleagues accountable for their what might be stereotypical beliefs or discriminatory actions? We're all leaders in this process, and you got to hold people accountable for this, and we can't let things just go. So how do you hold people accountable for this process?
For me, I mean, like I said before, people know I'll rip the Band-Aid right off and have the conversation, not necessarily in a space where I'm going to embarrass anybody or make them uncomfortable, but I have no problem picking up the phone and having a conversation with someone. I know that I'll tell you, I have a duty as a Black man in America to join organizations and to put myself in a space where I can show who I am and what I'm about, and to put some people in comfortable spaces. I mean, I'll tell you a funny story. Like one time we were in a meeting and I'm sitting in one chair, there's an empty chair, and Kiki is sitting in the chair over. And for those of you that don't know, Xavier and Dillard, probably the biggest rivals in our conference, and in some respects, it carries beyond, and our students know it. And Jim Abbott came and said, I got to separate the two of you, and sat in between us. And we had a great conversation. And it's really about making people feel comfortable. I'll say this before we kind of move on. So for those of you that are out there, and as a board member of MOAA, MOAA is not an organization just for minorities. It is an organization that works to provide opportunities for minorities. If you're not a member, I suggest that you take a look at our webpage to have a conversation with Stan, have a conversation with me, Kiki, or Marcus. We're all involved. We want a diverse group to continue to have discussions like we're having today. And like I said, it's not expensive. We do have some spirited discussions, some roundtables. Stan does a great job with the organization. And it really just continues to have this discussion that we're having today. And how do we make people more comfortable in the sports space? Stan, did I kind of capture that?
Yes, you did. You got my commercial in. Thank you.
There you go. You did not ask me for that.
Jim, I didn't know we were going to have a commercial, but that's okay. Marcus, how about that? I appreciate Jason doing it.
One point, I want to go back to what Kiki said a while ago, and she made a great point in terms of having the courage to speak up and speak about race. And when we have situations, and I've experienced situations where I've had colleagues and coaches and student athletes that have they've said things or done things that needed to be addressed immediately, and you have to have the courage to hold people accountable consistently, not just one time, not a couple of times, but consistently, and be you want to be fair about it, but you want to be consistent, but you have to have that courage to do so in this space, and I'm glad Kiki made mention of that.
I'll say thanks for that, Marcus. I'll say sometimes direct approaches are tough. One of the things or strategies that I use is I always try very hard to help people feel what it is the other person's feeling. So that I have two examples. One, we're in staff meeting. I had asked my coaches for something. I gave them a deadline. They didn't meet the deadline. And then this is normal. This is usually how we communicate. So, or somebody showed up late or something. So I was in the meeting, and I asked them a question, and I said, so if your student athlete didn't get something in you asked them to do on time, or they showed up late, what would you do? And they all looked. I said, would you expect some grace, or would you give them grace? Would you give them a hard time? Would you put them on the line and run them, and if they do it one more time, you're gonna put them off the team? You know, and I said, and then I said to them, well, how would you feel if that's the way I managed you? Every time, you know, you do the one thing wrong, then, you know, you're out the door, or I'm threatening your job every week because you didn't do something I wanted you to do. And when I've always provided some scenario where they've had to think about what if it was me, that's been helpful. My second example, if you've seen the movie A Time to Kill, so it's one of a racially charged movie, kind of about back in the day, Mississippi. Little black 10-year-old girl gets raped by white guys. Black father kills the white guy. He's on trial. He He's on trial. He has a white lawyer. The white lawyer tries to get his trial moved because they know in Mississippi, according to the culture, he's not going to get a fair trial in front of his peers. He's going to wind up with an all-white jury. Well, at the end of the movie, he realizes, well, this is what you have. I'm going to do the best I can to defend you, but I'll do the best I can. So what he winds up doing is, in his closing argument, I think Matthew McConaughey, love Matthew McConaughey, was the lawyer, and he tells the story of what happened to the young girl, to the jury. But at the end of it, he says, imagine the girl was white. And the man got off. But what he was successfully able to do was he was able to get them to see it from a different perspective. And so if I had a colleague and they were being inappropriate, I'd find a way to make them think, what if this were you? Or what if this were your sister or your brother or your uncle or your family? What would you do? And oftentimes when the ball is in their court or the shoe is on their foot, then there's the aha moment. And now we can grow.
Great. Thank you. Look, we got time for some questions from the audience. And do we have any questions that need to be asked?
Sure, yeah. We have some great activity in the chat. And if you guys have questions, feel free to type them in there. The first question comes from Tanisha McKinney. She's at Langston University, which is the only HBCU in Oklahoma. And they deal with a lot of times being prejudged and perceived aggression on and off the field in court. Mostly during our home game experiences. How do we encourage conversation/space with our opponent, athletic administrators, and staff to steer clear of the stereotypes?
Ooh, good one. Yeah, that's actually a good time to bring in the Jim Fries of the world, or the Stan Johnson. To me, I think, again, we have to start those conversations. We haven't gotten into all that. I told him a story about officiating, that there are issues I have with officiating that we need to have conversations about when it comes to those kinds of things. But to me, I would recommend, that sounds like something maybe at a conference level, there needs to be some conversation there, and relying on some of these people who are doing this diversity and inclusion work to come in and try to have some conversations that deal with some of those. I think what they call them is microaggressions is the word that you hear that may happen. It's not overt and you don't necessarily see it. But again, like I can give an example if people don't understand. So in terms of officiating, there were things that I experienced in terms of if it was an all-Black team or whether it was an integrated team, officials would call differently. They would be way more punitive sometimes than not. It's not something we could really talk about because you can't really pinpoint it and say it is. But I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, you didn't call this way when I played this other team when it was, the calls aren't the same. But those are conversations we have to have. We've never had the opportunity to talk about those kinds of things, and that would be the space that I would recommend from the conference level. Let's start bringing some people in and having it.
Hey, can I just jump in here? I'm not on the panel, but I be in Tanisha's conference, and Tanisha, I think now's the perfect time. We talked about uncomfortable conversations, and I'm guilty of, I don't want to offend somebody, so I avoid conversations for fear I might offend them. And maybe you have avoided bringing this up for fear that you might offend me. So why don't you and I figure out how to do this? Because at least talking about it is a start, I think.
Great, thank you, Jim. Okay, the next question here comes from M. McCaffrey, and I'm going to try to paraphrase. It sounds like at their school, they have a diversity officer, which is a new position at their small private liberal arts university. Advice on working better with that diversity officer who may get offended that white staff have better relationships with students of color than they do. Tough conversations to have, but there's a sense of ownership at times, and they want them to be successful and work together.
Before the panel answers, I'm going to answer the one thing I want to make sure people are aware of. when we say we have diversity officers on campus, one of the things we've got to be careful with is to not say, now we got somebody to take care of that it's their responsibility. It's not their responsibility. It's all of our responsibility to deal with this. And we often will put somebody into a position and think that it is now their responsibility to do it, when it's all of our responsibility to be involved. So now I'll let the panel go ahead and talk about it. Yeah. Either one of y'all want to answer that?
Well, I mean, I'll speak to it as we have someone on campus. You know, you got to rip the Band-Aid off, and you got to say, hey, here's the space that I'm in. Here's who I am. We want to make sure that we're in alignment with what you're working on campus. And, you know, again, people always say athletics does whatever they want to do anyway, but you've just got to foster, you've got to push the envelope and foster a better relationship with that person. You know, they will have programming. There's sometimes where they're going to have some programming that it may be one of those things that you say, hey, our student athletes are going to attend, and you make it a semi-mandatory event that they have to participate in. But you can't be afraid of approaching your diversity officer. If you're afraid of making them uncomfortable, you need to make them uncomfortable, because that's their role. Their role is to help you as the top line person with the university be able to deal with the issues that may or may not have manifested themselves at that time. But it's not about making that person feel comfortable in that space. Easier said than done, but I think on the back side of it, I think they'll appreciate it more. And when you're working for the greater good of your students or your student athletes, you know, you got to think about what their needs are and really push the envelope on it.
Take another question.
Go ahead, Sam. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, take another question. One of the things I do want to do, say this, you just mentioned something, Jason, is good. It's not a one-off. Oftentimes in this critical time right now, when it's heightened, the sense is heightened about diversity and inclusion and all of the things that we're doing, we are quick to react and want to do some things. But what happens now is that we'll train all our student athletes, we'll train all our staff, we'll do those things. 2 years from now, you will have turned over half of your student athletes. 4 years from now, you will turn over all of them. And if you're not currently consistently every year doing something, this is an ongoing process, 4 years from now, you'll have some of the same problems you had because you never did anything else. You can't just do it 1 week, this week, that's it. And 4 years from now, think you're going to have the same results. You'll turn over some of your staff. And if you don't educate them in the onboarding process and your new students that you're bringing in this onboarding process, you will have some of the same issues bubble up, and the culture hasn't changed because you're bringing people in that don't understand. Nobody teaches the culture. We talked about cultural, climate, cultural importance. We have to be able to understand that cultural intelligence means we're letting people know what it means, what the culture is.
Okay, this next one, Glenn Caston talked about we must dismantle power structures that is counter to safe spaces. How would an administrator or coach advice for how they can recognize those structures that may exist in their institution or their department that they may not be aware of?
So I'm not going to answer this one because Glenn works at my institution. So.
I'll give you an example. So one of the things, I guess, in my AD chair, and I think this is for all administrators, is you have to, it's like we walk this really tight line, because we have to be the space where students can come to us, but we also have our coaches, and we want to support our coaches. It's like a really tug of war. But when I've had student athletes come to me because they don't feel comfortable with having an uncomfortable conversation with their coach, I've mediated the conversation. I've opened up our conference room. I brought in the student athlete. I've sat the coach there, and I have facilitated the conversation. I have helped the students say what they want to say without threat of losing their scholarship or the coach, you know, benching them forever and saying they ever coming back, so that they could share whatever their particular concern was. And it was a really, in all situations, it wound up working out really well because one, the coach had the opportunity to clarify, like, well, you took what I said. That's not what I meant when I said whatever it was that I was saying. Here's what I'm trying to do. And so it was very interesting because, again, and coaches know this, kids don't get what they want, they gonna mumble, they gonna grumble. But sometimes it's just having that, it's just them being able to say, well, I ain't like it, coach. And coach may say, and I understand, but here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And in power structures, as Glenn is saying, you know, if we've always operated in the space of do what I say or else you're out, there was never a voice. I could never say how I felt. You know, and then of course, if I don't feel like I'm valued, then maybe I don't give you everything I could give to the team to make the team successful. So in the situations where I've had to do that, I think being able to be a mediator as an administrator with a student athlete and a coach can be really good. And again, it's not you're not having your coach's back, but just allowing the student to really communicate and get clarity on whatever it is the coach is trying to do. And I can say in most of the situations where I've done that, it's always turned out better. The student athlete and the coach got back on the same page and they move forward. I ain't hear from them anymore the rest of the year. But I think as an administrator, if you can be a facilitator and be open and help those conversations, drive those conversations, I think that could be very helpful in dismantling kind of the power structure.
Yeah, it's great.
Sometimes with those, and I had an instance along those same lines where a student came to me about something with their coach. It was a female student athlete and a male coach. And it was about how he spoke to student athletes. And I said, and particularly spoke to her, and I said to her, you know, in this one-on-one conversation, I said, well, what do you want me to do? And her mom was sitting in the room and she says, well, what do you mean? What does she want you to do? You're the athletic, or I guess I was the associate athletic director at the time. And I said, well, I can talk to the coach. I said, but you started the last 4 games. I said, I can say something to him. There's a chance you're not going to start. And so I said, what do you want me to do? And then she thought about it and her mom got irate and she kept telling her mom to calm down. And I said, here's the solution. And we've got to look at what we do and reframe our athletic departments from this standpoint. I said, do you like the captains on your team? And she said, yes, they do a very good job of communicating. I said, talk to your captains and have your captains talk to the coach, not use any names, and just say, hey, there are some people on the team who think you need to cool it and how you talk to it. And I said, in that way, you could still play and you could still start and you're not offending anyone. And you can get your point across. And it worked out. It's not always going to work that way, but it was the first level of teaching a student how to deal with some adversity and dealing with a coach. And it all worked out. And at the end, you know, I saw her the next game and she gave me the thumbs up as she was checking in at the start of the game that it had all worked out. So sometimes we just have to be creative in how we do it and approach things. And then at the end of the year, it just happened to be this young lady's senior year. At the end of the year, when I had the review with the coach, it was one of the things that I did address with that coach. And I told him the story about what had happened. So sometimes it's just about, for us as administrators, we have to be creative in how our approach with many topics. You know, Kiki fortunately was able to pull them both in the room and that kid didn't lose any starting time or any minutes. That's wonderful. But that is a huge concern amongst student athletes is, am I going to lose my scholarship? I start. Am I going to start? Am I going to get the brunt of all the running when we get to practice? So we have to deal with some of those things, and it's our charge to be creative, but it's not to just say deal with it. And I think we're getting out of the mode of just deal with it. I think we're having this conversation because people are saying they're tired of just having to deal with it. And I see a couple of people like, you know, have posted like it's everyone's responsibility to do the work. And you've got to get out of your comfort zone, and you got to move some things forward.
Mhm. I think it's also important that when you mentioned the power structure, like and coaches, like I think it's important that administrators don't like you. Coaches shouldn't. You have to set the standard that coaches can't be threatening kids. Like there's a way to demand it out of them, but my coaches also know you don't get to pull that card. Like I won't support you as an administrator. Like we're not in the business of doing that. I want you to learn how to communicate. I want you to teach them how to communicate in other ways other than threatening them. They're gonna lose their scholarship and their playing time. As a coach, one of the things I always had a space for my players to challenge me. They couldn't challenge me on when I was doing teaching. Like there was a teaching time and not teaching time. They couldn't challenge me during competition time. So part of practice was when I would teach and we're learning, and they need to ask questions and they need to learn. But when it got to game time, this is not the time. And if they did challenge me during that time, it was going to be problematic, and whatever came out of my mouth probably was what I wasn't supposed to say. Just being really honest. I'm just saying I was a coach. I get it. But I do think it's important. What I've shared with my coaches is if you provide the space, they won't come to me. If there's a space for them to come and say, well, coach, I really don't like the way you talk to me today. If they can say that to you and you provide a space, they won't come to me. My staff, if they don't like something I say, can come and tell me that with no threat of losing their job. If they're not happy with the direction we're going, they can absolutely say that in a one-on-one conversation with me in my office and in staff meetings when we're having conversations that allow that kind of challenging. Like if it's just something we throwing out there, we trying to figure it out, it's all open. But I think you have to create that culture. So I think that's really important. Like coaches, administrators should hold their coaches responsible for creating a space to be challenged. Again, it doesn't mean you have to make the decision because you're the coach, you're in control. But they should be able to ask the question or to say, well, I don't quite agree. Well, why don't you agree? And go back and forth. You never know. You might learn something.
We got time for one more question before the clock time comes up.
Yeah, let's go to Leah McCormick. What are 3 things white administrators or coaches should do right now to be better advocates for eliminating racial inequality?
Hey, Leah.
Good way to end. Good way to end. 3 things.
Read. Read, open your ears, open your heart. Those are my 3.
I think number 1, provide platforms for open dialogue. 2, become educated and provide educational experiences not only for you but your student athletes. And then 3, identify 1 or 2 action items that you can have for your student athletes in your program.
Jason?
You know, from my standpoint, I would suggest that 1, you find the folks that you feel comfortable with and have the conversation. And you may say, hey, I'm not trying to offend you. You start those things. And sometimes it's a small group. I think in this business, everybody has kind of that little core group that they talk with. And I think that is a great place to start. You know, use your peer groups that you have out there. 2, as people have said, you know, you got to read a little bit. You got to read some things that may take you out of your comfort zone when you're reading them. And 2, dive in. You know, dive in with some of your student athletes that you feel comfortable with. Have conversations with them. People that you may consider less volatile, have some conversations with them and grow in the space. You know, it's tough. No one's asking. I said dive right in, but no one's asking everyone to just jump off the deep end. That's
Oh.
not what anyone's encouraging. But start at the shallow end and move down the pool. And man, these sports metaphors, and just move down the pool, you know, to get there. And don't be afraid to have conversations. And you know, we have a lot of conversations here. If you really want to learn how to deal with it, I can give you my sports information director's number. They'll have some great conversations. If you know Ed Cassier, it'll be a spirited conversation.
And real quick, I just want to say, shout out to Leah at the NIA National Office. We were doubles champions in table tennis. I just want to give her a shout out.
Yes.
I'd like to thank this panel. I apologize. My grass cutter decided to come by and cut the grass today at this time. So you might hear a little noise in the background there. But one of the things I want to do is thank the panel for coming and being a part of this and giving us some words of wisdom around this area. If I had to add 3 things to this process, one, I would say we're not all experts in this area. Find an expert.
Yes.
Your campus or out in the membership that can do this work or you know, that can help you with this work. And I know all our budgets have been cut. All the things have been you know, condensed and things, but you need to find some dollars to put into doing it. You got to put some money into doing it in some case. And that's one of the ways to do it. The second thing is to reach out to the organizations like MOAA, like Women Leaders, like a lot of different organizations that are out there that it can help you do some of those things. We want to be champions for you and we need you to be champions for us. So we want to thank you to do that. Marcus and Kiki, thank you very much for joining us and being here today. Jim, thank you for hosting this. And Adam, thank you for being inviting us to be here. I hope everyone got something out of this, that they take something away from it, and that hopefully you will be able to move the conversation forward on your campus. Don't be afraid to move it. It's there, it's going to be there, and it need not stop now. So I appreciate all of you and thank you for coming and be a part of this. Jim, you got anything?
Oh, I would ask everyone to virtually help me thank the group. I think this is what it's all about. I'm Marcus and Kiki and Jason. I've known you for so long, and Stan, I've known you for a week, and I regret I haven't spent the last decade with you because you're a remarkable man and you're all remarkable. I think really for me, it's just determination. If you're determined to be better, you'll be better. And a big part of getting better, unfortunately, is doing something that you didn't know that you could do. So if you'll just be determined to be a little uncomfortable, and more than anything, my hope is that we won't just have the momentum and enthusiasm that we have today, that we'll find a way to sustain it. So thanks to everyone for participating. I will reiterate on behalf of the panel, on behalf of Adam and behalf of myself, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We sound like we know some things, but we're struggling just like everybody else. And I may not have the answer, but I will definitely have an opinion. So thanks again for joining us. And we look forward to the next opportunity to be together. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jim.
Take care.
Thank you.